So you guys all know about Session 0, right? That thing that every single solid group of D&D players has before the start of their campaign to make sure their campaign runs smoothly. And you also know how Wizards kinda sorta never really gave us any tangible rules for said Session 0. We kinda just had to make it up as we went along. Well, welcome to episode 19 of the Tasha's Cauldron of Everything review. This time, Wizards has given us a dedicated rule set for a Session 0 of a campaign, so we're going to be reviewing that today. Before we get started, only a very small percentage of you guys who watch my videos are actually subscribed, so if you're enjoying this review series and enjoy the content, be sure to subscribe. It's free, you can always change your mind, and it helps me out a lot. So here's the Dungeon Master's Tools section. If we skate right along, we can hit up the new rules for Session 0. Before making characters or playing the game, the DM and players can run a special session colloquially called Session 0 to establish expectations, outline the terms of a social contract, and share house rules. Making and sticking to these rules helps ensure the game is a fun experience for everyone involved. Who would have thought? Often a Session 0 includes building characters together. As the DM, you can help players during the character creation process by advising them to select options that will serve the adventure or campaign that awaits. So to begin, we have character and party creation. Each player has options when it comes to choosing a character, race, class, or background, though you may restrict certain options that are deemed unsuitable for the campaign. If there are multiple players in the group, you should encourage them to choose different classes so that the adventuring party has a range of abilities. It's less important that the party include multiple backgrounds, as sometimes it's fun to play an all-soldier party or a troop of adventuring entertainers. The backgrounds they choose define who their characters were before becoming adventurers and also include role-playing hooks in the forms of ideals, bonds, and flaws, things you ought to know. For example, if a player chooses the criminal background, one of the options for the character's bond is I'm trying to pay off an old debt I owe to a generous benefactor. If that's the character's bond, you should work with the player to decide who that generous benefactor is and build relevant storylines into the larger campaign. Next up, we have party formation. During Session 0, your role is to let players build the characters they want and help them come up with explanations for how their characters came together to form an adventuring party. It can be helpful to assume that the characters know each other and have some sort of history together, however brief that history might be. Here are some questions you can ask the players as they create characters to get a sense of the party's relationships. Are any of the characters related to each other? What keeps the characters together as a party? What are their character motivations for being in the party? What does each character like most about every other member of the adventuring party? And does the group have a patron? Group patrons are an entirely separate section. If you guys want to see a video on the group patrons section of this book, it's very long, but if you want to see it, I'll make a separate video on it. Just leave me a comment down below. If the players are having trouble coming up with a story for how their characters met, they may choose an option from the party origin table or let a D6 choose it for them. You should spend part of Session 0 helping players flesh out the details. For example, if the characters came together to overcome a common foe, the identity of this enemy needs to be determined. If a funeral gathered the group, the identity of the deceased and each character's relationship to them will need to be fleshed out. Here is your section right here. And here is a really small segment on running the game for a single player. A DM running the game for one player should spend part of Session 0 working out with the player to come up with their character's backstory, then let the player decide if they want to have a sidekick. See the sidekick section. You might need help. You might need to help the player run the sidekick for the first few sessions and should make sure the player understands the functions and limitations of sidekicks. Sidekicks are stalwart companions who can perform tasks both in and out of combat, including things such as setting up camp and carrying gear, so you can have them be your equipment monkey. Ideally, a sidekick's abilities should complement those of the main character. For example, a spellcaster makes a good sidekick for a fighter or rogue. Now for the social contract. D&D is first and foremost meant to be a fun-for-all experience. If one or more participants aren't having fun, the game won't last long. Session 0 is the perfect time for you and your players to discuss the experience they're hoping for, as well as topics, themes, behavior they deem appropriate. Out of this discussion, a social contract begins to form. Sometimes the social contract takes shape organically, but it's good practice to have a direct conversation during Session 0 to establish boundaries and expectations. A typical social contract in a D&D group includes implicit or explicit commitments to the following points. You will respect the players by running a game that is fun, fair, and tailored to them. You will allow every player to contribute to the ongoing story and give them character moments to shine. When a player is talking, you are listening. The players will respect you and the effort it takes to create a fun game for everyone. The players will allow you to direct the campaign, arbitrate the rules, and settle arguments. When you are talking, the players are listening. So basically only 10% of real, actual D&D games. Players will respect one another, listen to one another, support one another, and do their utmost to preserve the cohesion of the adventuring party. Should you or a player disrespect each other or violate the social contract in some other way, the group may dismiss that person from the table. This is amazingly funny to me. I don't know why. The social contract covers the basics, but individual groups might require additional agreed upon terms to guarantee a fun play experience for all, and a social contract typically evolves as the group members learn more about one another. Next up, we have hard and soft limits. Once you and your players have acknowledged the terms of the game's social contract and agreed to uphold them, the conversation can segue into a discussion about soft and hard limits. There are many ways to mediate this discussion, and you might want to do some research to find an approach that might work well for your group. For purposes of this explanation, these terms are described as follows. A soft limit is a threshold that one should think twice about crossing, as it is likely to create genuine anxiety, fear, and discomfort. A hard limit is a threshold that should never be crossed. Every member of the group has hard and soft limits, and it behooves everyone in the group to know what they are. Make sure everyone at the table is comfortable with how this discussion takes place. Players might not want to discuss their limits or aloud around the table, especially if they are new to role-playing games and have not spent a lot of time with certain other members of the group. This was definitely my case in the first couple games of D&D I played. This was me 100%. One way to alleviate such discomfort is to encourage the players to share their limits privately with you and allow them to present them without attribution to the whole group. For example, the players could write their limits on index cards for you to read aloud. However these limits are presented, it would be useful for you or one of the players to compile the limits onto one list that can be shared with the whole group. Keep in mind that any discussion about limits should be treated with care. Even sharing a person's limits can be a very painful experience, and this conversation should be handled with respect. Seems reasonable. Common in-game limits include, but are not limited to, themes or scenes of sex, exploitation, racial profiling, slavery, violence toward children and animals, gratuitous swearing, and intra-party romance. Common out-of-game limits include unwanted physical contact, dice sharing, dice throwing, shouting, vulgarity, rules lawyering, distracting use of cell phones, and generally disrespectful behavior. If my regular group of players followed this social contract, everybody at the table, myself included, would be out of that group in an instant. We all break one or two or some more of these rules at one point or another. The discussion of limits is important because DMs and players can have phobias or triggers that others might not be aware of. Any in-game topic or theme that makes a member of the gaming group feel unsafe or uncomfortable should be avoided. If a topic or theme makes one or more players nervous but they give you consent to include it in game, incorporating it should be handled with care, and you must be ready to veer away from such topics and themes quickly. Seems pretty standard. While Session 0 is the perfect place to start this discussion, it might not only be the only time limits are addressed. Someone might cross a line and need to be reminded of a limit, or someone might not think to include some of their limits in the initial discussion. Players can also discover new limits as the campaign unfolds. Make a plan to check in with the group and make sure this list of hard or soft limits is up to date, and remind everyone to revisit this list often in case it changes. Pretty safe. Don't see a problem with this really at all. Next up, we have game customization. In addition to shaping the game around the characters in the adventuring party, you should be prepared to customize the game to suit the player's tastes. The Know Your Players section of the DMG provides guidance for doing so based on known player archetypes. To help identify what types of players are in your group, you can ask the player each of the following questions. Which of the three pillars of adventuring, combat, exploration, or role-playing interests you the most? This one is actually really key. How much humor do you like in the game? What level of technology do you prefer? Do you enjoy solving in-game puzzles or riddles? Do you like to track experience points, or would you rather have your character advance in level when I tell you to? I don't care what you say. We are only doing milestone leveling. Next up, we have house rules, one of my favorite things to add in all of my games. House rules include optional rules such as those presented in Chapter 9 of the DMG and rules you create. If you plan to use any house rules, Session 0 is a good time to discuss the rules with the players and solicit their input. I do this every time. House rules are best presented as experiments, and time will tell if they are good for your game. If you introduce a house rule in Session 0 that turns out to have an adverse effect on people's enjoyment of the game, you may jettison or revise the house rule to create a better gaming experience for everyone. Don't feel bad if a house rule doesn't end up working as well as you intended it to. Remember, the goal is to ensure everyone is having fun. Shout out to secret death saves. Absolutely nobody in my party liked that mechanic, so we jettisoned it really quick. So guys, that is all of the information we have for the official rules of Session 0 presented in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. It's only been a couple decades, but Wizards finally recognized that we knew how to do it really well, so they decided to improve it with their own official rule set. Good job, Wizards. With that in mind, that is all I have for you in this video. If you guys like this video and this review, be sure to leave it a like. Leave any comments down below of what you think of the official Session 0 rule set. Do you think most groups are going to follow these rules? I actually wouldn't bet any money on it. Also, guys, be sure to subscribe if you haven't. We have just a few more videos on Tasha's Cauldron of Everything reviews to go through before we do a wide summarized review of the entire book. So be sure to look out for those videos coming very soon. And until next time, guys, have fun, stay safe, and as always, happy gaming.